Most Christians are just talking to the ceiling at 3 a.m. We have been taught that repeating religious scripts qualifies as devotion, but God is not looking for your memorized verses. He is looking for your heart. It is time to stop reciting and start actually praying before your tradition kills your intimacy. This is not a gentle observation, it is a diagnosis. And it is a diagnosis that applies to more chosen people than will be comfortable admitting it, because the recitation habit does not announce itself as a spiritual problem. It announces itself as faithfulness. It feels like discipline. It looks like consistency. The chosen person who wakes at 3 a.m. and opens their mouth and moves through the familiar sequence of the prayer they have prayed every morning for months or years is not doing something that looks like spiritual failure from the outside. From the outside, it looks like exactly what spiritual maturity is supposed to look like. The consistent, disciplined, faithful showing up in the pre-dawn hour to do the spiritual work that the chosen life requires. But from the inside, if the chosen person is honest, it has started to feel like something else entirely. Like filling a silence that is supposed to be full of God with the sound of their own voice, repeating the same things in the same order, with the same phrases in the same tone. Not because the things are wrong, because they have become automatic. And automatic is the specific opposite of what the early morning sacred watch was designed to produce. The early morning sacred watch is not a performance window. It is not the hour when the chosen person demonstrates their spiritual credentials to a God who is evaluating the quality of the language they bring to the pre-dawn. It is the most intimate and the most available hour of the entire day for the specific quality of encounter between the chosen person and the living God that cannot happen in any other configuration of the 24-hour cycle. The noise is gone, the obligations are asleep, the phone has not yet established its claim on the interior. And the God who woke the chosen person in this specific darkness did not wake them to hear a performance. He woke them because he has something to say, and because he wants to hear something genuine in return. Not the script, not the formula, not the spiritually polished version of the chosen person's interior that has been edited for divine consumption. The actual person, with the actual questions and the actual fears and the actual longing and the actual specific condition of the actual life they are actually living in this actual moment. That is prayer. The rest is recitation. And this message is going to name the difference with enough clarity and enough biblical specificity and enough pastoral honesty that the chosen person who has been filling the pre-dawn with recitation will not be able to return to it without knowing exactly what they are doing, not to produce condemnation, to produce the specific crisis of recognition that precedes the genuine return, because you cannot recover what you do not know you have lost. And the chosen person who has been losing the encounter of the early morning sacred watch to the anesthetic of religious recitation needs to see the loss clearly before they can begin the recovery that this message was written to enable. There is more available in the pre-dawn hour than what the recitation has been producing, more than the religious comfort of having said the right things in the right order before the day began, more than the spiritual satisfaction of having completed the morning prayer the way a person of discipline completes a morning workout. There is actual encounter, actual divine presence, actual conversation with the God who made the darkness and who fills it and who has been waiting in every pre-dawn waking the chosen person has ever had for the moment when they would stop performing for him and simply be with him. That moment is now. And this message is going to show you how to get there. This message was made for the one whose prayer life has gone quiet on the inside. If you have not yet joined this family of faith, do so now by subscribing to our channel and turning on notifications. There is a teaching of Jesus on prayer that is read in almost every church and applied in almost none of them. It sits in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 6, sandwiched between the teaching on giving and the teaching on fasting. And it contains some of the most radical and most countercultural statements about prayer that have ever been spoken. Radical not in the sense of theological complexity, but in the sense of directness. Jesus did not speak about prayer in the abstract. He spoke about it with the specific and uncomfortable precision of a teacher who could see exactly what his listeners were doing and who was going to name it regardless of how much the naming would disturb the religious consensus of the day. And what he named in Matthew 6 is not only the religious consensus of his day, it is the religious consensus of ours. Matthew 6:5 opens the teaching with an observation that would have landed with the force of a confrontation in the ears of the first-century Jewish audience. And when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets, that they may be seen of men. The hypocrites, not a gentle description. The Greek word translated hypocrites is hypocrites, which carried the specific meaning of an actor, a person who wears a mask, a person who performs a role for the benefit of an audience, rather than expressing a genuine interior reality. And Jesus applied that word to the people who were doing the most visible and the most socially affirmed praying in the religious culture of his day. The people who stood in the synagogues and on the street corners, who positioned themselves where the most people could observe them, who deployed their prayer as a public demonstration of their spiritual seriousness. He called them actors. He called the prayer performance. And he said the reward they received, the admiration of the people who witnessed the performance, was the only reward they would get, because the performance was not reaching the God it claimed to be addressing. The chosen person reading this in the contemporary context might feel a comfortable distance from this particular form of religious hypocrisy. The standing on street corners to be seen praying feels sufficiently distant from the contemporary spiritual culture that the warning can be received as a historical observation about a different kind of religiosity, rather than as a direct address of the present condition. But the principle behind the specific example is not distant at all. The principle is that prayer, which is primarily oriented toward an audience other than God, whether that audience is the congregation watching or the imagined spiritual observer, evaluating the chosen person's religious performance, or even the chosen person's own sense of what an adequate morning prayer looks and sounds like, is not prayer in the sense that Jesus described. It is performance. And the performance can happen in the privacy of the bedroom at 3 a.m. as easily as it can happen on the street corner, because the audience that performance requires does not have to be external. The internal audience of the chosen person's own religious self-evaluation is sufficient to convert the genuine pre-dawn encounter into the hypocritical performance that Jesus was describing. Matthew 6:6 provides the alternative with a specificity that is worth sitting inside. But thou, when thou prayest, enter into thy closet, and when thou hast shut thy door, pray to thy Father which is in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. The closet is not primarily a physical location. It is the interior condition of a prayer that has been sealed against every audience except God. The shutting of the door is the specific act of closing out every observer, internal and external, that would convert the prayer from a genuine conversation into a performance. And the pray to thy Father which is in secret is the specific relational framing that Jesus gives to the prayer he is describing. Not pray to the God who will be impressed by the quality of your language. Not pray to the divine evaluator who is assessing your theological precision. Pray to your Father. The relational term is deliberate and it is everything. A child does not perform for a father. A child talks to a father. And the prayer that Jesus is describing is the prayer of a child who has shut the door against every audience and who is simply talking to the Father who is already in the room. Matthew 6:7 is the verse that carries the most direct application to the recitation habit of the contemporary chosen person's early morning sacred watch. But when ye pray, use not vain repetitions, as the heathen do, for they think that they shall be heard for their much speaking. Vain repetitions. The Greek word is batalogo, which carries the meaning of babbling, of meaningless repetition. of the speaking many words without the substance of genuine meaning behind them. And the specific observation Jesus makes about why the heathen use vain repetitions is the observation that cuts most directly to the heart of the recitation problem. They think that they shall be heard for their much speaking. The recitation habit is built on a theological error. The error that the volume or the consistency or the quantity or the religious familiarity of the language used in prayer is what produces the divine hearing. That saying the right things in the right order with the right frequency is what gets through. And Jesus says plainly that this is not how the God he is describing operates. The Father does not hear based on the much speaking. He hears based on the genuine address of the genuine heart, which means the chosen person who wakes at 3 a.m. and fills the pre-dawn with much speaking, however theologically correct the speaking is, has not necessarily produced the genuine divine hearing that the pre-dawn encounter was designed to produce. Matthew 6:8 carries the theological foundation for why the vain repetition model of prayer is not only ineffective but unnecessary. Be not ye therefore like unto them, for your Father knoweth what things ye have need of, before ye ask him. The Father already knows. This is the statement that makes the recitation habit most theologically absurd. The chosen person is not informing God of their needs through the repetition of the petition. God already knows the needs. He knew them before the chosen person woke at 3 a.m. He knew them before the prayer began. He knew them before the chosen person was born. The purpose of the prayer is not to communicate information to an uninformed God. It is to enter into the genuine relational exchange with a Father who already knows and who is waiting for the genuine address of the genuine heart, rather than the repetition of a petition that the chosen person has already established. He does not need to receive in order to know the need it expresses. Luke 18:1-8 carries the parable of the persistent widow that Jesus told specifically to address the question of how genuine prayer is sustained over time without becoming the vain repetition that Matthew 6-7 warns against. The widow kept coming. She did not come with a script. She came with a genuine and specific need and a genuine and persistent refusal to be turned away without the justice she was seeking. And the persistence of her coming was not the vain repetition of a formula. It was the genuine and sustained address of a specific need to the one person who had the authority to meet it. The persistence that Jesus commended in the widow's prayer was the persistence of genuine relationship with a specific need, not the persistence of a religious routine with a memorized request. And the distinction between those two forms of persistence is the distinction that this entire message is built on. The widow knew what she needed. She knew who could give it. And she kept asking with the genuine urgency of a person for whom the answer actually mattered. That is the prayer Jesus was commending, not the recitation of the morning script that the chosen person has memorized to the point that the asking no longer carries the urgency of someone for whom the answer actually matters. The church has largely ignored this teaching, not because it is obscure, but because it is inconvenient. Because the institutional management of the spiritual life requires forms that can be taught and evaluated and standardized. And genuine prayer by its nature cannot be standardized. It cannot be put in a curriculum or evaluated for correctness or managed by an institution. It can only be lived in the specific and irreplaceable encounter between the specific interior of the specific chosen person and the specific and living God who woke them in the specific darkness of the specific pre-dawn of their specific life. That encounter is what the early morning sacred watch was always designed to produce. And recovering it begins with the honest acknowledgement of what has been replacing it. Something happens to language when it is repeated often enough. Not immediately, not even quickly, but over time, with the slow and almost imperceptible consistency of water-wearing stone, the words that once carried genuine weight begin to lose it, not because the words themselves have changed, not because the theological content they carry has become less true, but because the interior relationship between the person speaking and the words being spoken has gradually detached. And what was once the living expression of a genuine interior reality has become the habitual production of a religious sound. This is how religious language dies in the mouth, not through a dramatic crisis of faith, through the ordinary and unremarkable process of repetition without renewal. And the chosen person who does not understand this process is the chosen person who will not recognize it when it happens to their own early morning prayer, because the process is invisible from the inside until it has progressed far enough that the prayer feels empty and the chosen person does not know why. Isaiah 29:13 is the verse in which God names this process with a directness that is almost startling in its precision. He said through the prophet, "Wherefore the Lord said, Forasmuch as this people draw near me with their mouth, and with their lips do honor me, but have removed their heart far from me, and their fear toward me is taught by the precept of men." The anatomy of the recitation problem is contained in that single verse. The mouth is drawing near, the lips are honoring, the religious language is present, and it is theologically correct, and it is being offered to God with what appears from the outside to be genuine devotion, and the heart has removed itself. The interior has departed from the engagement that the exterior language is claiming to express. And the specific diagnosis that God adds is the one that makes the verse most applicable to the contemporary chosen person's early morning prayer life. Their fear toward me is taught by the precept of men. The religious behavior has been learned. It has been transmitted as a taught practice rather than arising from the living interior of genuine encounter. And the taught practice, however correct its form, produces the performance rather than the reality. Mark 7:6-7 records Jesus quoting this same Isaiah passage in his confrontation with the Pharisees about their tradition, and his application of it reveals the specific mechanism through which the recitation problem perpetuates itself across generations. "Well hath Esaias prophesied of you hypocrites, as it is written, This people honoureth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Howbeit in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men." Teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. The recitation habit is sustained by the transmission of the form, without the transmission of the life behind the form. One generation of the chosen discovers the genuine encounter of the early morning sacred watch and begins to pray from the living interior of that encounter with the specific and genuine language that the encounter produces. And then that language, which was living in the mouth of the one from whose genuine interior it arose, is transmitted to the next generation as the correct form of the pre-dawn prayer. And the next generation learns the language, and they repeat it. And over time, the language that was once the genuine expression of the encounter becomes the substitute for the encounter, because the form was transmitted without the encounter that gave the form its life. And the precept of men, the religious instruction to pray this way in this order with these words at this time, has replaced the living relationship with the God whose encounter was always the source of the language rather than its product. The specific forms that the recitation habit takes in the contemporary chosen person's early morning sacred watch are worth naming with enough specificity that they can be recognized rather than simply acknowledged in the abstract. The first form is the formulaic opening, the specific and unchanging sequence of words with which the chosen person begins every prayer, regardless of the actual interior condition they are bringing to the pre-dawn. Father God, or Dear Lord, or Heavenly Father, spoken with the automatic delivery of a person who is signaling the beginning of the prayer rather than genuinely addressing the person they are speaking to. The opening has become the clearing of the throat, the linguistic signal that the prayer is commencing, rather than the genuine first word of a genuine conversation with a genuinely present God. The second form is the petition list, the sequence of requests that the chosen person moves through every morning in approximately the same order with approximately the same language. The family, the finances, the health, the calling, the specific people who are always on the list, the specific situations that are always mentioned. and the moving through of the list with the speed and the familiarity of a person who is completing a task rather than the pace, and the genuine specificity of a person who is actually bringing real weight before the God who can actually address it. The petition list is not wrong in its content. The family and the finances and the health and the calling are legitimate and important subjects of genuine prayer. But the list format, with its implication that prayer is a sequence of items to be covered rather than a conversation to be had, produces the mechanical rather than the genuine almost by design. The third form is the scriptural declaration that has been emptied of its faith content through familiarity. The chosen person who has been declaring Philippians 4:19 over their finances every morning for 3 years is declaring a verse that has become, through the sheer frequency of the repetition, a verbal habit rather than a genuine act of faith. The words are present. The faith that makes the words a living declaration rather than a religious sound has gradually vacated, not because the verse is no longer true, because the chosen person's interior relationship to the verse has shifted from the genuine receiving of a living promise to the habitual production of a familiar sound. And the declaration that has lost its faith content is the declaration that the enemy does not fear and that the heaven does not respond to, because what heaven responds to is the faith, not the formula, and the formula without the faith is the vain repetition that Matthew 6:7 describes. The fourth form is what might be called the spiritual autopilot, the condition in which the chosen person's mouth is producing prayer language while their interior is elsewhere. The words are coming out, the religious sequence is being observed, and the actual interior of the chosen person, the specific thoughts and the specific emotional reality and the specific condition of the actual life they are living is not present in the prayer at all. It is thinking about the day ahead. It is processing the residue of yesterday. It is anywhere except the genuine relational engagement with the God to whom the words are ostensibly being addressed. The spiritual autopilot is the most advanced stage of the recitation habit and the most spiritually dangerous, because it is the condition in which the appearance of prayer is most complete, and the reality of it is most entirely absent. Amos 5:21-23 carries God's response to this condition with a severity that should permanently disabuse the chosen person of the idea that the religious performance of prayer is an acceptable substitute for the genuine article. I despise your feast days, and I will not smell in your solemn assemblies. Though ye offer me burnt offerings and your meat offerings, I will not accept them. Neither will I regard the peace offerings of your fat beasts. Take thou away from me the noise of thy songs, for I will not hear the melody of your viols. The noise of your songs, the religious activity has become noise. The burnt offerings and the meat offerings and the peace offerings, all of it offered with the correct form and the correct frequency and the correct religious seriousness, has been rejected because the interior that was offering it had departed from the genuine engagement with God that the offering required. And if God could say that about the Old Testament sacrificial system, the most divinely prescribed and the most theologically specific form of religious activity that had ever been established, he can say it about the early morning prayer that moves through the petition list without the genuine presence of the heart that the petition list claims to represent. The recitation habit does not develop overnight. It develops through the slow and ordinary process of the familiar becoming the automatic and the automatic becoming the empty. And the recovery from it does not happen overnight either. But it begins with the honest recognition that what the mouth has been producing in the pre-dawn is not the same as what the pre-dawn was designed to receive. And that recognition, held with the honesty that it requires, is the first movement toward the genuine prayer that the early morning sacred watch has always been waiting for. If the previous section named the disease, this section names the cure. And the cure is not a better prayer technique. It is not a more sophisticated approach to the structuring of the pre-dawn prayer time. It is not the addition of new elements to the existing prayer practice that will inject enough novelty to temporarily restore the feeling of genuine engagement before the familiarity process begins again, and the new elements themselves become part of the recitation. The cure is something more fundamental and more demanding and more beautiful than any technique. It is the return of the actual person to the actual presence of God. The return of the genuine interior, with all of its unresolved questions and all of its specific fears and all of its real and particular condition in the specific season the chosen person is living in, to the genuine encounter with a God who has never required the performance and who has always been waiting for the person behind it. Psalm 62:8 carries the most direct and the most practically instructive description of genuine prayer in the entire Psalter. Trust in him at all times. Ye people, pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us. Pour out your heart. Not present your theological position. Not demonstrate your knowledge of the promises. Not produce the spiritually impressive version of your interior that you have curated for divine consumption. Pour out your heart. The pouring is the specific image of genuine prayer. A pouring is uncontrolled in a way that the careful placement of theologically correct language is not. A pouring goes where it goes. It does not follow a pre-established channel. It empties what is actually in the container rather than what the person doing the pouring decided in advance would be appropriate to release. And the heart that is poured out before God in genuine prayer is the heart that contains what it actually contains. The specific grief and the specific joy and the specific confusion and the specific longing and the specific anger and the specific gratitude of a person who is actually alive and actually in relationship with an actual God, and who is bringing all of that actual interior into the actual presence of the one who made it. The first quality that distinguishes genuine prayer from recitation is the quality of interior presence. The chosen person who is genuinely praying is actually in the prayer. Their specific thoughts and their specific emotional reality and the specific condition of their specific life in the specific moment of the praying are present in the content of the prayer rather than absent from it. Not every thought and every emotion needs to be verbalized, but the interior that is generating the prayer is the actual interior of the person, not a managed version of it. Hebrews 4:15-16 establishes the theological foundation for this quality of interior presence. For we have not an high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore come boldly unto the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. The high priest who can be touched with the feeling of the infirmities is the specific theological ground for the chosen person bringing the actual infirmity rather than the managed spiritual presentation of it. Jesus can be touched with the feeling of it, which means the feeling is welcome. The actual condition is welcome. The unresolved and sometimes messy and sometimes theologically awkward real interior of the chosen person is what the throne of grace is specifically designed to receive. And the boldness that the verse invites is not the boldness of confident religious performance. It is the boldness of a person who has been told that what they actually are is welcome before the throne, and who takes that invitation seriously enough to actually show up as themselves. The second quality that distinguishes genuine prayer from recitation is the quality of genuine listening. Recitation is entirely outbound. It produces language and then it ends. There is no interior space created for the response that a genuine conversation requires. But genuine prayer is a conversation. It has two directions, and the direction from God toward the chosen person, the specific response of the living God to the genuine address of the genuine heart, is the dimension of genuine prayer that the recitation habit most specifically excludes, and that the chosen person who has been reciting most specifically misses. Creating the interior space for listening in the early morning sacred watch is not the addition of an empty silence to the end of the prayer time. It is the deliberate and specific act of turning the interior from the outbound to the receptive, of bringing what was genuinely poured out before God and then waiting in genuine attentiveness for the response that the genuine conversation produces, not always in words, often in the specific quality of interior peace or conviction or clarity or comfort that the genuine presence of God in the genuine prayer of the genuine chosen person consistently produces, and that the recitation habit, with its filling of every moment with outbound religious language, consistently prevents. The third quality is the quality of genuine vulnerability. Genuine prayer requires the chosen person to bring what is actually there, rather than what they wish were there. The chosen person who is genuinely afraid does not pray as though they are not afraid. They bring the fear before the God who is the refuge and the strength and the very present help in trouble that Psalm 46:1 declares. The chosen person who is genuinely angry about something does not sanitize the anger into a more spiritually acceptable emotion before presenting it to God. They pour it out with the specific directness that David poured his anger into the Psalms, trusting that the God who made the anger and who knows the specific situation that produced it is not threatened by the genuine expression of it. The chosen person who is genuinely confused about the direction of the calling does not perform the theological confidence that they do not currently feel. They bring the confusion before the God who gives wisdom to all generously and without reproach, as James 1:5 declares, trusting that the genuine asking from the genuine condition of genuine confusion will receive the genuine wisdom that the genuine need requires. Romans 8:26-27 introduces the dimension of genuine prayer that goes beyond what the chosen person's own interior can consistently produce. Likewise, the Spirit also helpeth our infirmities, for we know not what we should pray for as we ought. But the Spirit itself maketh intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. And he that searcheth the hearts knoweth what is the mind of the Spirit, because he maketh intercession for the saints according to the will of God. The Spirit makes intercession in the moments when the genuine prayer of the chosen person has gone deeper than the language available to the chosen person's own interior. The Spirit who lives inside the chosen person takes over. The groanings that cannot be uttered are not the failure of the prayer. They are the prayer reaching the depth at which the human language is no longer adequate, and the Spirit's language, which is beyond human speech, but which the Father who searches the hearts understands perfectly, carries the prayer from the interior of the chosen person to the throne of God with a precision and a completeness that the most eloquent human prayer cannot match. And this dimension of genuine prayer is entirely unavailable to the recitation habit, because recitation is entirely dependent on the language that the chosen person produces from their own interior. The Spirit cannot groan through a script. The fourth quality is the quality of expectation. Genuine prayer expects something to happen, not necessarily in the form of an immediately visible answer to a specific petition, but in the form of the genuine encounter that the genuine address of the genuine heart before the living God always produces in some way. The changed interior after the prayer that was not there before it. The specific scripture that drops into the consciousness during the prayer with the weight of a word that was sent rather than retrieved. The specific quality of peace that the prayer of Philippians 4:6-7 promises. The peace that passes understanding that comes as the response to the anxious thing being cast before God in genuine supplication. These are the expected outcomes of genuine prayer, and the chosen person who prays with the expectation that something will be different after the prayer than it was before it is the chosen person who is approaching the early morning sacred watch with the posture of genuine encounter rather than the posture of religious obligation fulfilled. The expectation is not presumption. It is the natural interior posture of a person who has understood what the early morning sacred watch is for and who is bringing their genuine heart to it with the genuine confidence that the genuine God on the other side of it is genuinely present and genuinely responsive to the genuine address of the genuine chosen person. He genuinely woke in the genuine darkness of the genuine pre-dawn. There is a temptation to treat the early morning sacred watch as simply an early version of the daytime prayer, to approach the pre-dawn hour with the same interior posture and the same prayer structure and the same quality of spiritual engagement that the chosen person brings to the prayer they pray at noon or in the evening. And this temptation, however understandable it is given the consistency that the chosen life called to maintain across all its prayer, is the specific misunderstanding that reduces the early morning sacred watch to a less convenient version of the daytime prayer, rather than the categorically different and categorically more significant spiritual encounter that it was always designed to be. The pre-dawn hour is not the same as the daytime. It is not the same spiritual environment. It is not the same quality of interior availability. And the prayer that is appropriate to the daytime prayer environment is not the prayer that is most appropriate to the pre-dawn. Because the pre-dawn has created conditions for prayer that the daytime cannot replicate. And the chosen person who brings the daytime prayer into those conditions without adjusting the quality of their engagement to match the specific demands and the specific opportunities of the pre-dawn is like a person who enters the most acoustically perfect concert hall in the world and performs the same casual humming they do in the shower. The space deserves more, and the pre-dawn deserves more. The first specific quality of the early morning sacred watch that distinguishes it from the daytime prayer is the quality of the stripping. By the time the chosen person is awake at 3 a.m., everything that the day provides as a buffer between the genuine interior of the chosen person and the raw encounter with God has been stripped away. The community that provides the relational covering of the chosen life is asleep. The activity that fills the waking hours with the sense of forward momentum and productive engagement is absent. The noise that the contemporary world generates continuously and that the chosen person has learned to navigate as the background of their daily experience is silent. And the specific defenses that the chosen person maintains in the waking hours, the social presentation, the managed emotional register, the interior posture of a person who is functioning in the world and who has calibrated their expression to the social requirements of that functioning, are down. The pre-dawn strips all of it. And what is left when all of it has been stripped is the actual person, not the functioning version, the actual one, the one who has questions they have not asked out loud, and fears they have been managing for months, and a specific longing for God that the busyness of the day has been covering with the noise of the necessary. That actual person is what the early morning sacred watch receives. And the prayer that is appropriate to that actual person is the prayer that matches the stripping. The genuine prayer that brings what the stripping has revealed, rather than the recitation that covers it back up with religious language before the genuine encounter can occur. Isaiah 54 carries the specific description of what God does with the pre-dawn stripping when the chosen person presents themselves genuinely in it. He wakeneth morning by morning. He wakeneth mine ear to hear as the learned. The wakened ear is the ear that the stripping produces. The ear that is not competing with the noise of the day, or the demands of the social presentation, or the managed emotional register of the functioning person. The ear that is available in the way that only the pre-dawn stripping makes available. And the hearing as the learned is the specific quality of reception that the pre-dawn hearing makes possible. The deep and nuanced and full reception of what God is saying that the distracted daytime hearing cannot consistently achieve. But the wakened ear that hears as the learned is not the ear that is also producing the continuous outbound stream of religious language that the recitation habit generates. The hearing requires the quiet, and the quiet requires the choosing person to do something that the recitation habit specifically prevents. It requires them to stop talking long enough to listen. The second specific quality of the early morning sacred watch is the quality of the undivided attention. In the daytime, the chosen person's attention is divided, not by choice or by spiritual failure, but by the simple and legitimate reality of a life that has obligations and relationships and work, and the thousand small demands of the ordinary daily existence. The daytime prayer is offered from a divided interior. The chosen person is present in the prayer and simultaneously aware of everything that is waiting for them on the other side of the prayer's completion. And this awareness, however background it remains, is a specific form of division that reduces the quality of the interior presence in the prayer in ways that the chosen person who is honest about their experience of the daytime prayer will recognize without difficulty. The pre-dawn offers something the daytime cannot offer: undivided attention. The obligations have not yet assembled. The demands have not yet formed. The awareness of what is waiting on the other side of the prayer's completion is not yet present, because the day has not yet begun its assembly of the things that need the chosen person's attention. And the prayer that is offered from that undivided attention is a prayer of a qualitatively different character from the prayer that is offered from the divided interior of the daytime. It goes deeper, it stays longer, it receives more, because the whole person is there rather than the portion of them that the daytime prayer can spare. Mark 1:35 is the verse that establishes the model of the early morning sacred watch from the life of Jesus, with a specificity that reveals something important about why the pre-dawn was the hour Jesus chose for the most significant prayer of his daily practice. And in the morning, rising up a great while before day, he went out and departed into a solitary place, and there prayed. A great while before day, not simply early, a great while before day. Before the day had any presence, before the obligations of the ministry had begun to assemble, before the crowds and the petitions and the demands of the people who needed things from him had formed at the edges of the morning. He went to the pre-dawn precisely because it was the hour when the undivided attention was still available, when the solitary place was genuinely solitary, when the prayer that was offered in it was offered from the complete interior of a person who had given everything of that morning to the encounter with the Father, before the ministry of the day had had a chance to claim any of it. And if the Son of God, who carried the fullness of the divine nature within the human frame, chose the pre-dawn as the hour of his most significant daily prayer, the chosen person who treats the pre-dawn as simply a more inconvenient version of the daytime prayer has misunderstood something fundamental about what the hour was designed to provide. The third specific quality of the early morning sacred watch is the quality of the spiritual atmosphere. The pre-dawn carries a spiritual atmosphere that the daytime does not replicate. The thinning of the veil that occurs in the fourth watch, the specific accessibility of the divine frequency in the pre-dawn silence, the particular quality of the encounter between the chosen person and the living God that the stripped and quiet and undistracted pre-dawn makes possible, are the specific conditions that the early morning sacred watch was designed to exploit for the maximum depth and the maximum fruitfulness of genuine prayer. And the recitation habit, with its filling of those conditions with the outbound production of familiar religious language, is the specific waste of the most spiritually favorable conditions available to the chosen person in the entire 24-hour cycle. It is the bringing of the ordinary into the extraordinary, the filling of the consecrated vessel with the ordinary content of the unconsecrated daily routine, and the prayer that is appropriate to the extraordinary spiritual atmosphere of the pre-dawn is not the ordinary prayer of the daytime routine. It is the prayer that matches the atmosphere, the stripped and genuine and listening and expectant prayer of a person who understands what the pre-dawn has created for them and who is bringing the full quality of their genuine interior to meet the full quality of the divine presence that the pre-dawn has made most accessible. Psalm 5:3 closes this section with the posture that the early morning sacred watch requires from the chosen person who approaches it with the understanding of what it actually is. My voice shalt thou hear in the morning, O Lord. In the morning will I direct my prayer unto thee, and will look up, the directing, the intentional positioning of the genuine interior toward God before the day has established its own direction, and the looking up, the expectant and attentive posture of a person who has sent something genuine into the atmosphere and who is genuinely alert to what comes back, not the posture of a person who has completed a religious task and is now moving on to the next item of the morning routine. The posture of a person who has entered a genuine encounter and who is genuinely waiting for what the genuine God on the other side of it is going to do with what was genuinely brought. That is the posture of the early morning sacred watch, and it is a posture that the recitation habit has never been able to produce, and that the genuine prayer of this hour, offered with the full interior availability that the stripping of the pre-dawn makes possible, produces every single time. The 5 signs that your early morning prayer has become recitation. This chapter is written as a diagnostic, not a condemnation. The difference between a diagnosis and a condemnation is the difference between a doctor who names the condition so that it can be treated and a judge who names it so that it can be punished. This diagnostic is offered in the spirit of the doctor, because the chosen person who recognizes the signs of recitation in their early morning prayer life is not a spiritual failure. They are a person whose prayer life has undergone the ordinary and predictable process of familiarity that every repeated spiritual practice faces, without the specific and intentional countermeasures that the maintenance of genuine prayer requires. The recognition is not the end of the prayer life, it is the beginning of its recovery. And the recovery begins with the honest engagement with the 5 signs that the early morning prayer has drifted from the genuine encounter into the religious performance. The first sign is the absence of surprise in the prayer. The chosen person whose early morning prayer has become recitation is the chosen person who always knows what they are going to say before they say it. The prayer has a shape that has been established through repetition, and that the morning prayer reliably follows regardless of what the actual interior condition of the chosen person is in that specific morning. The opening is familiar, the sequence of petition is familiar, the closing is familiar, and the entire arc of the prayer from beginning to end is predictable in a way that the genuine conversation with a living and dynamic and responsive God should never be. Because a genuine conversation with the living God does not follow a predictable arc. It goes where it goes. It responds to what the genuine interior of the chosen person brings and what the Spirit of God introduces into the prayer space in response to the genuine bringing. It surprises the person praying, not always dramatically, but with the specific quality of unexpectedness that genuine encounter always produces, and that mechanical repetition never does. The diagnostic question for this first sign is the honest one. When did you last experience a moment in the early morning prayer where the prayer went somewhere you did not expect it to go, where something arose in the prayer that was not on the internal script, where the Spirit introduced a thought or a direction or a burden or a scripture that redirected the prayer into territory that the chosen person had not planned to visit that morning? If the answer is that this has not happened recently, or that the chosen person cannot remember the last time it happened, the first sign of the recitation drift is present. The prayer has become predictable, and predictable prayer is the prayer that the chosen person is generating entirely from their own familiar interior, rather than the prayer that is being shaped by the living presence of the God they are addressing. The second sign is the absence of genuine listening. The chosen person whose early morning prayer has become recitation is the chosen person whose prayer is entirely outbound. It produces language and then it ends. There is no interior space created for the response that a genuine conversation requires. The prayer moves from the opening to the petition, to the declaration, to the closing, without a single moment in which the chosen person has genuinely stopped talking and genuinely waited in attentive silence for what the God they have been addressing might have to say in response. And the absence of the listening is not a minor omission. It is the specific exclusion of the dimension of genuine prayer that makes it a conversation rather than a monologue. A conversation in which only one party speaks is not a conversation, it is a speech. And the chosen person who has been giving a speech to God every morning in the pre-dawn, rather than having a conversation with Him, has been missing the specific and most transformative dimension of the early morning sacred watch. The diagnostic question for this second sign is the one about silence. Is there genuine interior silence in the early morning prayer? Not the silence of having finished the outbound portion and waiting for the feeling of completion before moving into the day. The genuine, attentive, expectant silence of a person who has genuinely addressed something to the living God and who is genuinely waiting, with the full attention of the awakened interior, for whatever the living God chooses to say in response. If the early morning prayer does not contain this quality of genuine listening silence, the second sign of the recitation drift is present. The third sign is the feeling of completion without encounter. The chosen person whose early morning prayer has become recitation will frequently experience, at the end of the prayer time, the specific feeling of having finished without having arrived. The prayer is done. The time has been given. The religious obligation of the morning devotion has been met. And yet something that should be present in the interior of a person who has just had a genuine encounter with the living God is absent. The specific quality of being with someone that the genuine prayer produces. The interior shift that the genuine presence of God in the genuine prayer of the genuine chosen person consistently produces. The changed interior after the prayer that was not there before it is not present. The chosen person rises from the prayer feeling not significantly different from how they felt when they went into it. Not refreshed, not encountered, not carrying something from the pre-dawn that they were not carrying before the prayer began. Just finished. And finished without encounter is the specific emotional signature of the recitation habit at its most developed stage. James 4:3 carries a dimension of this third sign that is worth sitting inside. Ye ask and receive not, because ye ask amiss, that ye may consume it upon your lusts. The asking that does not receive is not always the asking of the wrong thing. It is sometimes the asking from the wrong interior, the asking amiss. The petition that is offered from the religious performance rather than from the genuine heart of a person who actually needs what they are asking for. And the chosen person who has been asking amiss in the early morning sacred watch, who has been going through the petition list with the interior detachment of a person who has performed this sequence many times before, should not be surprised that the feeling of completion without encounter is the consistent result of the performance, because the encounter is the response to the genuine, and the performance does not produce the genuine. The fourth sign is the irrelevance of the actual interior condition to the content of the prayer. The chosen person whose early morning prayer has become recitation prays approximately the same things, regardless of what is actually happening in the area and in their life. The specific grief of yesterday does not significantly alter the prayer. The specific joy of a breakthrough that came does not significantly alter the prayer. The specific fear about a situation that is developing does not significantly alter the prayer. The specific longing for God that the dry season has been producing does not significantly alter the prayer. The prayer proceeds through its familiar territory with a consistency that is not the consistency of faith, but the consistency of the script. And the script does not care what the actual interior condition of the person reciting it is, because the script was not generated by the actual interior condition. It was generated by the habitual practice that has established the content of the prayer independently of the specific reality of the chosen person's daily life. Matthew 15:8 is the verse that covers this fourth sign with the theological precision that Jesus borrowed from Isaiah. This people draweth nigh unto me with their mouth, and honoureth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. The heart that is far from the prayer is the heart that has departed from the genuine engagement. and whose absence the prayer does not reflect, because the prayer is no longer being generated by what is actually in the heart. The diagnostic question for this fourth sign is the direct one. Does what I prayed this morning reflect what is actually in my interior right now? Is the content of the prayer connected to the actual condition of my life in this specific season? If the honest answer is that the prayer would have been approximately the same regardless of what was actually happening in the chosen person's interior, the fourth sign of the recitation drift is present. The fifth sign is the gradual reduction of the prayer time to the minimum that the chosen person's sense of religious obligation requires. This is the sign that reveals most clearly the direction in which the recitation habit moves the prayer life over time. Genuine encounter expands. The chosen person who has had a genuine encounter with God in the pre-dawn does not end the prayer because the time is up or the list has been completed. They end it because the encounter has reached a natural completion, and the natural completion of a genuine encounter almost always takes longer than the minimum that the religious obligation requires. But the recitation habit moves in the opposite direction. As the prayer becomes more mechanical, the tolerance for the prayer time decreases, because the mechanical repetition of familiar religious language is not intrinsically rewarding in the way that genuine encounter is rewarding. And the chosen person whose early morning prayer has become recitation will find over time that the prayer time has quietly contracted. The 20 minutes has become 15, the 15 has become 10, the 10 has become 5. Not through a conscious decision to reduce the prayer time, but through the gradual and almost imperceptible compression that the decreasing intrinsic reward of the mechanical prayer produces over time. Revelation 3:15-16 carries the divine assessment of the lukewarm that is most directly applicable to this fifth sign. I know thy works, that thou art neither cold nor hot. I would thou wert cold or hot. So then, because thou art lukewarm, and neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth. The lukewarm is not the cold. The cold is the honest acknowledgement that the prayer is not happening. The lukewarm is the performance of the prayer without the genuine interior temperature that genuine prayer requires. And the lukewarm prayer of the recitation habit, offered in the minimum time that the religious obligation requires, with the minimum interior engagement that the habitual sequence demands, is the specific spiritual condition that the letter to Laodicea addresses, not with condemnation, with the urgent invitation to return to the genuine that the lukewarm has replaced. Because the God who assesses the prayer knows the difference between the cold and the lukewarm and the hot. And what he is waiting for in the early morning sacred watch is not the minimum of the lukewarm obligation. It is the full temperature of the genuine encounter that the pre-dawn was always designed to produce. The chosen person who wants to understand what genuine prayer in the early morning sacred watch looks like does not need to look far. The biblical record is full of it, not as an idealized picture of what prayer should look like when everything is going well, and the chosen person is operating from a place of spiritual fullness and emotional stability, as the raw and honest and sometimes desperate and always genuine record of what specific people brought to their specific encounters with God in the specific darkness of their specific pre-dawn hours. And what the biblical watchman brought to those encounters was never a script. It was never a performance. It was never the managed presentation of a spiritual self that had been edited for divine consumption. It was themselves, their actual selves, with everything that their actual lives contained in the moment of the bringing. And the God who received what they brought responded to it with the specific and transformative power that the genuine address of the genuine heart has always released in the economy of God. David is the first and the most extensively documented of the biblical watchmen whose early morning prayer the record preserves. And what is most striking about David's pre-dawn prayer life, as the Psalms reveal it, is its emotional range. The Psalms that were written from the pre-dawn, from the wilderness seasons and the crisis seasons and the seasons of sustained pursuit and sustained danger, cover the full spectrum of human interior experience with a completeness and a specificity that no prayer script could accommodate. Psalm 22 opens with the cry of desolation. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? That is not a formula, that is a person. A specific person in a specific condition of specific anguish, who has brought the anguish to God without the theological varnish that would have made it look more spiritually acceptable. And Psalm 63, written from the wilderness of Judah in the physical darkness of a dawn that had not yet broken over a life that was being hunted, opens with the declaration of verse 1. O God, thou art my God, early will I seek thee. My soul thirsteth for thee, my flesh longeth for thee in a dry and thirsty land, where no water is. The thirst is real, the longing is real, the dry and thirsty land is real. And the prayer that arises from the real thirst and the real longing and the real dry land is a prayer that has never been anywhere near a script. It is the genuine cry of a genuine interior before a genuine God. And that is precisely why it has sustained the faith of every generation of the chosen that has encountered it in the 3,000 years since David wrote it. Because the genuine always outlasts the performed. Because the real always reaches what the script cannot. Daniel's pre-dawn prayer practice is documented in Daniel 6:10, with a brevity that contains within it of the most significant statements in the entire record of the chosen person's pre-dawn watch. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day, and prayed, and gave thanks before his God, as he did aforetime. The consistency of Daniel's prayer practice is what the verse emphasizes, not the content of the prayer on this specific occasion. The consistency. Daniel had been praying 3 times a day toward Jerusalem since long before the decree that made it a capital offense. The practice was not a crisis response. It was the established and unbroken rhythm of a life that had been built on genuine pre-dawn and daytime encounter with God across decades of exile in a foreign culture that was actively trying to assimilate him into a worldview that had no room for the God he was praying to. And the consistency of the practice, maintained through the full range of the circumstances of Daniel's life, from the early days of the exile to the moment when the practice was declared punishable by death, was never the consistency of the recitation habit. It was the consistency of the genuine relationship, the relationship that had produced the prayer of Daniel 9, one of the most extensive and most theologically profound recorded prayers in the entire Old Testament, written not from a formula but from the specific and genuine condition of a man who had been reading Jeremiah and who understood what the 70 years of the exile meant, and who brought that understanding before God with the full weight of his genuine interior engagement with what he had read. Jesus, in the early morning sacred watch, is the model that this message has returned to consistently, because it is the model that the message of this channel consistently points to. Mark 1:35 records the bare fact of the practice. Luke 6:12 provides the most extensive record of the duration. And it came to pass in those days that he went out into a mountain to pray, and continued all night in prayer to God. All night. This was not the minimum of the religious obligation. This was not the 5 minutes of the pre-dawn routine that the recitation habit compresses toward over time. This was the full night. The complete and unbroken giving of the darkness to the genuine encounter with the Father. And it was not all night because Jesus had a longer prayer list than the ordinary chosen person. It was all night because the genuine encounter does not watch the clock. It goes where it goes. It stays as long as the genuine exchange of the genuine conversation requires it to stay. And the chosen person who has been in genuine prayer will not always know where the time went. Because the genuine encounter with the living God is the one experience in the chosen life that makes the time pass, in a way that no other experience produces. Nehemiah's pre-dawn prayer in Nehemiah 1:4-11 is the model of the genuine prayer that arises from the specific interior condition of the specific moment, rather than from the pre-established script of the religious routine. The report had come. The walls of Jerusalem were broken down. The gates were burned. And Nehemiah 1:4 records the first response. And it came to pass, when I heard these words, that I sat down and wept, and mourned certain days, and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. He sat down and wept. He did not go immediately to the pre-dawn prayer closet and begin the familiar sequence of the morning prayer. He sat in the genuine response of a genuine interior to a genuine situation, and he let that genuine response become the prayer. The weeping was the prayer. The mourning was the prayer. The fasting was the prayer. And the extended prayer of Nehemiah 1:5-11 that followed the weeping and the mourning is not a script. It is the genuine and specific address of a genuine and specific need by a genuine and specific person who knew exactly what he needed and exactly who could give it, and who brought both the knowing and the needing before God with the full weight of the genuine interior that the genuine report had produced in him. What all four of these biblical watchmen share, across the full range of the different conditions and the different seasons and the different content of their specific pre-dawn encounters, is the absence of the script. None of them were reciting, all of them were praying. The distinction between what they were doing and what the recitation habit produces in the chosen person who has drifted from the genuine into the mechanical is the distinction that this message has been building toward from the first word of the hook. The distinction is the presence or the absence of the actual person in the prayer. David was in his Psalms, Daniel was in his thrice daily prayer, Jesus was in the all-night prayer on the mountain, Nehemiah was in the weeping and the mourning that became the pre-dawn cry. They were all genuinely there. Their actual interiors were actually present in the actual prayers. They were actually praying. And the God who received their genuine presence responded to it with the specific and transformative power that genuine presence has always released in the economy of God. The same power is available to the chosen person who brings the same quality of genuine presence to the early morning sacred watch. Not the performance of the watchman, the presence of the person. That is all the pre-dawn has ever required, and that is all it requires now. The church did not arrive at the recitation habit overnight. It did not wake up one morning and collectively decide to replace the genuine relational prayer of the New Testament community with the institutionalized liturgical forms that a contemporary chosen person has inherited as the default model of what prayer is supposed to look like. The drift happened gradually through a series of historically understandable and theologically well-intentioned decisions that each moved the practice of prayer a small distance further from the genuine encounter and a small distance closer to the managed form. And the accumulated distance of those small movements across 20 centuries of church history is the distance between the prayer of the upper room and the recitation of the contemporary chosen person's early morning sacred watch. Understanding how the church got here is not an exercise in historical blame. It is the specific understanding that allows the chosen person to see the drift for what it is, not the natural and inevitable evolution of a maturing spiritual community, but the accumulated consequence of specific and identifiable decisions that can be recognized and reversed. The prayer life of the New Testament community was charismatic in the most literal sense of that word. It was gift-driven, spirit-led, and irreducibly personal in a way that the institutional management of religious practice finds almost impossible to accommodate. Acts 2:42 records that the early church continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, and in breaking of bread, and in prayers. The prayers, the specific and plural, and therefore varied and individually genuine prayers of a community that was praying from the full range of their genuine interiors in the spirit-led and gift-empowered manner that the outpouring of Pentecost had produced. These were not liturgical forms. They were the specific and genuine addresses of specific and genuine people to the specific and genuine God, who had just poured his Spirit on all flesh and had produced in them the specific and genuine prayer language the Spirit generates in the interior of the person he fills. The movement away from this Spirit-led and genuinely personal prayer toward the formalized liturgical structures that would eventually become the default model of prayer in the institutional church began in the post-apostolic period and was driven by three specific and understandable pressures. The first was the pressure of doctrinal protection. As the young church expanded geographically and culturally, the diversity of the prayer expressions that the Spirit-led charismatic model produced began to create theological anxiety in the leadership of the expanding institution. The genuine prayer of the genuine Spirit-filled believer is, by its nature, theologically uncontrolled. It goes where the Spirit leads. And where the Spirit leads is not always where the institutional guardians of doctrinal correctness would direct it. The formalization of prayer language into approved liturgical forms was, from the perspective of the institutional leadership, a theologically protective measure. The standardized prayer could be evaluated for doctrinal correctness. The genuine Spirit-led prayer of the individual believer could not. And the choice of the manageable form over the unmanageable genuine is the first step in the long journey from the prayer of the upper room to the recitation of the contemporary morning devotion. The second pressure was the pressure of scale. As the church grew from the intimate community of the early house churches to the large institutional structures of the Constantinian and post-Constantinian era, the logistical demands of providing a unified and coherent prayer experience to a community of thousands of people who were gathering in large public spaces produced the liturgical structures that the intimate house church had never required. The corporate prayer of a gathering of 12 people in someone's home can be Spirit-led and genuinely personal in a way that the corporate prayer of a cathedral full of thousands cannot be managed in the same way. The liturgical forms were the institutional solution to the logistical problem of scale, and the solution, while practically understandable, came at the cost of the genuine that the intimate scale of the house church had made possible. The third pressure was the pressure of transmission. The genuine prayer of the genuine Spirit-filled believer cannot be taught the way a liturgical form can be taught. You cannot write a curriculum for the prayer that arises from the genuine interior of the genuine encounter with the living God. You cannot standardize the assessment of its correctness or measure its depth or evaluate its theological adequacy. But you can teach a liturgical form. You can transmit it from generation to generation with the reliability of a written text. You can ensure that the next generation knows the correct words in the correct order, with the correct theological content, and the preference of the transmissible form over the untransmissible genuine is the specific choice that Galatians 4:9-11 addresses when Paul asked the Galatians why they were turning again to the weak and beggarly elements and why they were observing days and months and times and years. The elements were beggarly, not because the practices were intrinsically wrong, but because they had been elevated to the position of the genuine encounter they were never meant to replace. Colossians 2:8 carries the warning that is most directly applicable to the trajectory this history describes. Beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ, the tradition of men. Paul was not warning against tradition as such. He was warning against the tradition that had been elevated to the position of Christ himself, that had replaced the genuine relationship with the form of the relationship, that had substituted the manageable religious practice for the unmanageable living encounter. And the contemporary chosen person who has inherited the recitation habit as the default model of the early morning sacred watch is the person who has been spoiled, in the specific Colossians 2:8 sense of being robbed, by the accumulated tradition of men that arrived at the contemporary morning devotion through 20 centuries of the preference of the manageable over the genuine. The recovery of genuine prayer in the early morning sacred watch is not the rejection of tradition as such. Tradition carries within it the accumulated wisdom and the accumulated devotion of generations of the chosen who brought their genuine interiors to the encounter with God, and whose encounter produced forms and expressions that have real value for the contemporary chosen person who approaches them with the genuine interior they were designed to carry, rather than the mechanical recitation they were never designed to produce. The Lord's Prayer of Matthew 6:9-13 is the most significant example of this. Jesus did not give the disciples the Lord's Prayer as a recitation. He gave it as a framework, a specific and spirit-breathed outline of the dimensions that genuine prayer covers, a map of the territory rather than the journey itself. After this manner, therefore, pray ye, he said in verse 9. After this manner, not these exact words, this manner. The manner of the genuine address to the Father, the genuine seeking of the kingdom, the genuine asking for the daily bread, the genuine receiving of the forgiveness, and the genuine extending of it, the genuine request for deliverance from evil. The framework is the tradition. The genuine prayer is what the framework was designed to carry, and the chosen person who recovers the genuine prayer within the tradition, who uses the Lord's Prayer as a map for the genuine journey rather than as a script for the mechanical performance, is the chosen person who has found the way back to what the tradition was always trying to preserve. The hook of this message named What Tradition Does to Intimacy. When tradition has been elevated above the genuine encounter, it was always meant to serve. Tradition kills intimacy when it is treated as the destination rather than the vehicle. When the form is preserved at the expense of the life that the form was designed to carry. When the correct words in the correct order at the correct hour become the measure of the prayer's validity, rather than the genuine presence of the genuine heart before the genuine God. The history of how the church got here is the history of tradition gradually displacing intimacy through the accumulation of understandable but ultimately costly decisions that preferred the manageable form over the unmanageable genuine. And the recovery that this message is calling the chosen person to is the specific and personal recovery of the genuine within the tradition. The return of the actual person to the actual encounter, the decision to bring to the early morning sacred watch, not the form that the tradition has transmitted, but the genuine interior that the tradition was always trying to point toward. There is a specific and critical misunderstanding that the chosen person who has recognized the recitation habit in their early morning prayer life is most vulnerable to making as they begin the recovery toward genuine prayer. The misunderstanding is the assumption that the recovery is primarily a matter of personal effort, that if the chosen person simply tries harder to be present in the prayer, tries harder to avoid the familiar formulas, tries harder to create interior space for listening, the recitation will give way to the genuine through the force of the chosen person's own disciplined intention. And this assumption, however understandable, it is given the self-improvement framework that the contemporary culture applies to almost every problem, will produce exactly the wrong outcome. Because the attempt to generate genuine prayer through the personal effort of the chosen person's own spiritual discipline is the attempt to produce from the natural interior of the chosen person what can only be produced by the supernatural presence of the Spirit who lives inside the chosen person. And the natural interior of the chosen person, left to its own resources, will always drift back toward the familiar, always. Because the familiar is what the natural interior defaults to when the supernatural influence of the Spirit is not actively engaged. Romans 8:26-27 is the foundational text for understanding why the early morning sacred watch cannot be done alone and why the recovery from recitation to genuine prayer is not primarily the chosen person's project but the Spirit's. Likewise, the Spirit also helpeth our infirmities. For we know not what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit itself maketh intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. And he that searcheth the hearts knoweth what is the mind of the Spirit, because he maketh intercession for the saints according to the will of God. The Spirit helpeth our infirmities. The infirmity in the context of this verse is not the moral failure that the word infirmity most commonly conjures. It is the specific weakness of the human interior in the face of the demands of genuine prayer. The "we know not what we should pray for as we ought" is the honest and inspired acknowledgement that the natural interior of the chosen person does not consistently know what genuine prayer requires. It does not always know what to pray for. It does not always know how to pray for what it knows needs to be prayed for. And it does not always have the interior resources to sustain the genuine engagement of prayer against the consistent pressure of the familiar and the mechanical that the recitation habit generates. The Spirit helpeth, not the Spirit advises, not the Spirit coaches, not the Spirit provides a better framework for the chosen person to generate their own prayer. The Spirit helpeth. The helping is the direct, active, engaged assistance of the Spirit in the interior of the chosen person in the specific moment of the prayer. And the assistance the Spirit provides is not the assistance of a resource that is brought into the prayer from the outside. It is the assistance of the one who is already inside the chosen person and who is already interceding, already producing in the interior of the chosen person the specific quality of genuine prayer that the chosen person's own interior cannot consistently generate. The groanings that cannot be uttered are not the failure of the prayer language. They are the prayer language of the Spirit, operating in the interior of the chosen person at a depth and with a precision that the human language available to the chosen person cannot reach. And the Father who searches the hearts knows what is in the mind of the Spirit and receives from the Spirit the specific and accurate intercession, according to the will of God, that the chosen person's own prayer cannot consistently produce. This is the most significant theological reality about the early morning sacred watch that the recitation habit most specifically excludes. Because the recitation habit is entirely dependent on the language that the chosen person generates from their own interior. It has no room for the Spirit's leadership into unfamiliar territory because it has already pre-established the territory the prayer will cover. It has no room for the groanings that cannot be uttered because it has already committed to the words that will be spoken. It has no room for the prayer according to the will of God that the Spirit produces because it has already decided what the prayer will contain before the prayer has begun. The recitation habit is the chosen person praying alone. And the chosen person who is praying alone in the early morning sacred watch is the chosen person who is bringing only the resources of their own natural interior to the most significant spiritual encounter of the day, which is exactly why the prayer feels empty, because the one who was supposed to be the primary agent of the prayer has been excluded from the process by the pre-established script that left no room for his leadership. Ephesians 6:18 establishes the specific quality of prayer that the Spirit's engagement in the early morning sacred watch produces. Praying always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, and watching thereunto with all perseverance and supplication for all saints, in the Spirit. The phrase is not the description of the emotional atmosphere of the prayer. It is the description of the specific mode of the prayer. The prayer that is offered in the Spirit is the prayer that is generated by, and led by, and sustained by, and ultimately completed by the Spirit, who is doing in the interior of the chosen person what the chosen person cannot do on their own. And the all prayer and supplication of the verse is the full spectrum of the prayer forms that the Spirit leads the chosen person through in the genuine early morning sacred watch. Not the limited and familiar spectrum of the recitation habit, the full spectrum, which includes the petition and intercession and the confession and the thanksgiving and the declaration and the listening and the groaning that cannot be uttered, and every other dimension of genuine prayer that the Spirit knows is needed in this specific pre-dawn for this specific chosen person in this specific season of the specific calling they are carrying. The practical question that the chosen person who wants to make themselves more available to the Spirit's leadership in the early morning sacred watch needs to ask is not, How do I generate better prayer from my own interior? But how do I make my interior more available to the Spirit's generation of genuine prayer through me? And the answer to that question begins with the specific interior posture of surrender that the Spirit-led prayer requires before it can begin. The recitation habit begins with the chosen person already knowing what the prayer will contain and proceeding to produce it. The Spirit-led prayer begins with the chosen person genuinely not knowing what the prayer will contain and genuinely surrendering the content of the prayer to the Spirit's leading before the prayer has begun. This surrender is not the passive absence of the chosen person's own genuine interior from the prayer. It is the specific and active releasing of the pre-established agenda for the prayer, so that the Spirit has the interior space to lead the prayer into the territory that the will of God requires, rather than the territory that the chosen person's own familiar script has already designated. 1 Corinthians 14:15 carries the balance of the Spirit-led prayer with the chosen person's own understanding in a way that addresses the potential misunderstanding of the Spirit-led prayer as entirely passive. What is it then? I will pray with the Spirit, and I will pray with the understanding also. I will sing with the Spirit, and I will sing with the understanding also. Both the Spirit and the understanding. The Spirit's leadership of the prayer and the chosen person's genuine and engaged participation in the prayer that the Spirit is leading. The Spirit-led early morning sacred watch is not the chosen person becoming passive and waiting for the Spirit to produce a prayer that operates entirely independently of the chosen person's own interior. It is the chosen person bringing their genuine interior with its specific needs and its specific questions and its specific longing and its specific condition in this specific season, and surrendering that genuine interior to the Spirit's leadership so that what the Spirit produces in and through the genuine interior of the chosen person is the prayer that the will of God requires, rather than the prayer that the recitation habit has pre-established. The practical expression of this in the early morning sacred watch looks like the specific interior practice of beginning the pre-dawn prayer, not with the familiar opening formula, but with the specific and genuine surrender to the Spirit's leadership. The conscious and deliberate act of releasing the internal agenda for the prayer before the first word is spoken. The specific prayer of invitation, Lord, lead this. Not I will say what I always say. You say what needs to be said through me. That single and simple act of genuine surrender at the beginning of the early morning sacred watch is the specific act that reopens the interior to the Spirit's leadership that the recitation habit has been closing. And what follows that surrender in the chosen person who genuinely means it is not the familiar sequence of the morning script. It is something genuinely different. Something that goes somewhere the chosen person did not plan. Something that addresses dimensions of the chosen person's life and calling and interior condition that the recitation habit was covering with familiar language, but not actually reaching. Something that carries the specific weight of the genuine rather than the familiar comfort of the mechanical. Something that leaves the chosen person at the end of the pre-dawn hour, not with the feeling of completion, without encounter that the recitation habit produces, but with the specific and unmistakable sense of having been with someone, of having been genuinely heard and genuinely met and genuinely changed in some specific way by the genuine encounter with the living God who woke them in the darkness, and who has been waiting for exactly this quality of genuine surrender in the early morning sacred watch. The chosen person cannot do this alone. The recovery from recitation to genuine prayer is not the chosen person's project, it is the Spirit's. And the chosen person's role in the recovery is not the generation of better prayer from their own interior, but the specific and genuine surrender of their interior to the Spirit who is already inside them and who has been waiting in every pre-dawn waking the chosen person has ever had. For the moment when the agenda would be released and the genuine encounter could begin. How to transition from recitation to genuine prayer in the early morning sacred watch. This is the main thing the entire message has been building toward. The theology has been established, the diagnosis has been made, the biblical models have been examined. The history of how the church arrived at the recitation habit has been traced. The role of the Spirit in the genuine prayer that the early morning sacred watch requires has been established. And now the chosen person who has recognized the recitation pattern in their pre-dawn prayer life and who wants to move from where they are to the genuine relational prayer that the early morning sacred watch was designed to produce needs the specific and actionable pathway from the one to the other. This chapter provides it, not as a new prayer technique that will eventually become the next recitation habit if the interior relationship behind it is not maintained, as the specific practices that make the interior most available to the Spirit's leadership of the genuine prayer the pre-dawn encounter requires. The first practice is the practice of beginning with honesty rather than with formula. The specific and foundational act of naming what is actually present in the interior of the chosen person before anything else is said to God in the early morning sacred watch. Not the spiritually impressive version of the interior, the actual version. If the chosen person wakes at 3 a.m. afraid, the prayer begins with the fear, not with the declaration of faith that covers the fear with theological language, before the fear has been brought before the God who is the refuge and the strength and the very present help in trouble. The fear first, named specifically, brought honestly before the God who already knows it is there and who is not threatened by its presence in the prayer. If the chosen person wakes with grief, the grief comes first. If they wake with confusion about the direction of the calling, the confusion comes first. If they wake with the specific and particular joy of something that broke through yesterday and that they want to bring before God with genuine gratitude, the joy comes first. Whatever is actually in the interior of the chosen person in the specific moment of the waking is what the prayer begins with. Not because the negative should be the permanent focus of the prayer, but because the prayer that begins with the actual interior of the chosen person is the prayer that has the actual person in it. And the actual person in the prayer is the prerequisite for the genuine encounter that the pre-dawn was designed to produce. Lamentations 3:40-41 provides the scriptural model for this practice of beginning with honesty. Let us search and try our ways, and turn again to the Lord. Let us lift up our heart with our hands unto God in the heavens. The searching and trying of the ways is the honest interior inventory that precedes the lifting of the heart. It is the specific act of looking at what is actually there before bringing it to God. And the lifting up of the heart, not the lifting up of the words or the lifting up of the theologically correct petition, is the specific act of genuine prayer that the honest interior inventory makes possible. You cannot lift what you have not first honestly examined. And the chosen person who goes directly from the waking to the familiar formula without the honest interior inventory is the chosen person who lifts the formula rather than the heart. And the formula, however theologically correct, does not carry what the heart carries, which is why the heart needs to go first. The second practice is the practice of building genuine listening silence into the pre-dawn prayer rather than filling every moment with outbound communication. This is the practice that the recitation habit most specifically prevents and that the recovery from recitation most specifically requires. Because the genuine conversation with the living God is a two-directional exchange, and the direction from God toward the chosen person, the specific response of the living God to the genuine address of the genuine heart, cannot be received if the chosen person is filling every moment of the pre-dawn with outbound language that leaves no interior space for the receiving. The listening silence is not the empty silence of a person who has nothing to say and is waiting for the inspiration to continue. It is the full and attentive silence of a person who has said what was genuinely in the interior and who is now genuinely waiting with the full awakened attention of the pre-dawn hour for whatever the living God chooses to say in response. The duration of the listening silence does not need to be prescribed. It needs to be genuine. 2 minutes of genuine attentive listening silence is worth more than 20 minutes of outbound religious language that has left no space for the response that the genuine conversation requires. The third practice is the practice of following the Spirit's leading into unexpected territory, rather than returning the prayer to the familiar script when the Spirit begins to move in a direction that was not planned. This is the practice that requires the most trust and the most courage, because it requires the chosen person to release the control of the prayer's content to a leadership that does not announce in advance where it is going. The Spirit's leading in genuine prayer does not come with a map. It comes as a prompting, a specific thought, or a specific person's name, or a specific scripture, or a specific direction that arises in the interior of the chosen person during the prayer, with a weight that suggests it did not originate from the chosen person's own agenda for the morning. And the chosen person who follows that prompting, who allows the prayer to go where the Spirit is leading it, rather than returning it to the familiar territory of the pre-established script, is the chosen person who discovers what the genuine encounter of the early morning sacred watch was always designed to produce. Because the Spirit knows what needs to be prayed in this specific pre-dawn, for this specific chosen person in this specific season. And the prayer that follows the Spirit's leading into the territory that the Spirit has identified as the territory of this morning's genuine encounter will reach what the familiar script, however faithfully maintained, has not been reaching. The fourth practice is the practice of praying the Psalms as a living conversation, rather than as a devotional reading. The Psalms are the most extensive and the most emotionally comprehensive prayer vocabulary available to the chosen person. They cover the full range of the genuine human interior, from the depth of desolation to the heights of worship. And the chosen person who uses the Psalms as the starting point for their genuine pre-dawn prayer, who takes a specific psalm that matches the specific interior condition they woke with, and who prays it as their own genuine expression rather than reading it as a text to be consumed, is the chosen person who has found one of the most powerful tools available for the recovery of genuine prayer from the recitation habit. Because the Psalms were written from genuine interiors, they carry the specific weight of the genuine encounter that produced them. And when the chosen person prays them from the genuine interior that the specific psalm matches, the words that were once someone else's genuine prayer become the vehicle for the chosen person's own genuine prayer, in a way that recovers the living quality of the language without requiring the chosen person to generate the language from scratch. The fifth practice is the practice of using the specific burdens and the specific joys and the specific fears and the specific gratitudes of the current waking life as the primary material of the prayer, rather than generic petition categories. The chosen person whose marriage is in difficulty brings the marriage before God with the specific detail of the difficulty, rather than the generic petition for family blessing. The chosen person whose calling is in a season of confusion brings the specific question about the specific next step, rather than the generic petition for direction. The chosen person whose body is carrying something specific brings the specific and named condition before the God who is the healer, rather than the generic petition for health. The specificity of the prayer is the evidence of the genuine interior being present in it, because the generic petition can be offered without the genuine interior being present. The specific petition cannot. The specific petition requires the chosen person to actually be present in the prayer, because the specific detail of the petition only exists in the interior of the person whose life the detail belongs to. And the prayer that carries that specific detail is the prayer that carries the person, which is the prayer that the early morning secret watch was always designed to receive. Philippians 4:6 establishes the principle of the specific prayer with a precision that is worth sitting inside. Be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. The requests made known not the category of need indicated, the specific request named. The prayer that makes the request known is the prayer that brings the specific thing before the specific God, who can address the specific thing in the specific way that the specific thing requires. And the making known of the request is not for God's information, as Matthew 6:8 established. It is for the chosen person's genuine presence in the prayer, because the act of naming the specific request is the act of bringing the actual interior of the chosen person into the actual prayer, rather than the generic category of need into the generic prayer that the recitation habit substitutes for the genuine. The sixth practice is the practice of returning to the genuine without condemnation when the prayer has drifted back into the recitation, because the drift will happen. The recovery from the recitation habit to the genuine prayer of the early morning sacred watch is not a single decision that produces a permanent and irreversible transformation. It is the daily and sometimes moment-by-moment choice to bring the genuine interior to the genuine encounter rather than the familiar script. And the chosen person who wakes tomorrow morning and finds that the prayer has drifted back into the familiar formula in the middle of the pre-dawn is not a person who has failed the recovery. They are a person who has been shown the specific point at which the recitation habit is most deeply entrenched in the structure of the morning prayer. And the appropriate response to the recognition of the drift is not the condemnation of the person who drifted, but the simple and immediate return to the genuine without the self-condemnation that makes the return harder than it needs to be. Romans 8:1 declares that there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. The absence of condemnation applies to the drift in the prayer, the same way it applies to every other dimension of the chosen life where the ideal has not been consistently achieved. Return, simply return, without the condemnation, without the extended self-assessment of how far the recitation had progressed before the recognition came. Simply return to the genuine, name what is actually in the interior, surrender the agenda for the remainder of the prayer to the Spirit's leadership, and continue in the genuine for as long as the genuine can be maintained before the drift begins again and the return is required again. This is the daily practice, not the perfect performance of genuine prayer from beginning to end of the pre-dawn hour. The consistent return to the genuine whenever the drift into the recitation is recognized, and the consistency of the return, maintained without condemnation across the mornings of the chosen life, is what builds over time the interior muscle of the genuine prayer that the early morning sacred watch was always designed to produce. There is a specific and observable transformation that takes place in the chosen life when the early morning sacred watch has been recovered from recitation and restored to the genuine relational prayer that it was always designed to produce. Not the transformation of a single dramatic encounter that changes everything overnight. The cumulative and layered and builds over time transformation of a person whose interior is being consistently encountered by the living God in the pre-dawn hours, rather than consistently performing for Him. And this transformation is not only interior, it is visible. It shows up in the relationships of the chosen person, in the clarity of their discernment, in the fruit of the calling, in the specific quality of their presence in the spaces they inhabit, in the resilience of their faith in the difficult seasons, and in the specific and undeniable sense that the people around the chosen person begin to have that something has changed, that there is a depth and a settledness and a specific quality of genuine spiritual authority present in the chosen person that was not there before the early morning sacred watch became genuinely alive. The first thing that changes when the early morning sacred watch becomes genuinely alive is the interior relationship with God. This is the most fundamental and the most consequential change, and it is the one that all the other changes flow from. The chosen person who has been reciting in the pre-dawn has been maintaining the form of a relationship with God, while the substance of it has been quietly hollowing out through the accumulated distance of the mechanical engagement. And the chosen person who recovers the genuine prayer of the early morning sacred watch begins to discover that the relationship has substance again, that God is not a theological category being addressed in the prayer, but a genuine presence being encountered in it, that the pre-dawn hour is not a religious obligation being fulfilled, but the most significant appointment of the day being kept, and the interior relationship with God that the genuine pre-dawn encounter consistently replenishes is the specific source from which everything else in the chosen life draws its sustaining life. John 4:23-24 carries the theological declaration that is most directly applicable to this first transformation. But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshippers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. The Father seeketh such, the genuine worshippers, the ones who bring the genuine spirit and the genuine truth of their actual interior to the actual encounter, rather than the performed worship of the religious form. And the chosen person who brings the genuine spirit and the genuine truth to the early morning sacred watch is the chosen person who is being specifically sought by the Father, who is meeting the Father in the specific quality of encounter that the Father seeks. And the relationship that is built in that quality of encounter is the relationship that has the depth and the substance and the genuine intimacy that the recitation habit, for all its consistency and all its theological correctness, was slowly but steadily destroying. The second thing that changes is the quality of the spiritual discernment. The chosen person who has been consistently in genuine pre-dawn encounter with God develops over time a specific quality of spiritual perception that the person who has been reciting does not carry in the same depth, because the genuine prayer of the early morning sacred watch includes the genuine listening that the recitation habit excludes, and the consistent practice of genuine listening in the pre-dawn, the specific interior attentiveness that the genuine conversation requires, produces over time the sharpening of the spiritual ear that Isaiah 54 describes as the hearing of the learned. The chosen person who has been genuinely listening in the pre-dawn begins to hear things in the ordinary moments of the day that the chosen person who has been reciting does not hear. The specific prompting to reach out to a specific person at a specific moment. The specific warning that something in a specific situation is not what it appears to be. The specific direction about a specific decision that the daytime deliberation has not been able to resolve. These are the fruits of the consistently awakened ear. And the consistently awakened ear is the ear of the chosen person who has been genuinely listening in the pre-dawn rather than filling the pre-dawn with the outbound production of familiar religious language. The third thing that changes is the fruit of the calling. Jeremiah 29:13 carries the promise that most directly applies to this dimension of the transformation. And ye shall seek me and find me when ye shall search for me with all your heart. With all your heart. The genuine pre-dawn prayer is the prayer of the whole heart rather than the prayer of the religious performance of the whole heart. And the finding that the wholehearted seeking produces is not a theological abstraction. It is the specific and practical discovery of what God is actually doing in the chosen person's season, what the assignment actually requires in this specific moment, what the next step of the calling actually is, that the genuine encounter of the pre-dawn consistently delivers, and that the recitation habit consistently misses. And the calling that is being genuinely directed from the genuine encounter of the genuine pre-dawn is the calling that produces the fruit that the John 15:16 declaration reserves for the genuinely abiding branch. Fruit that remains. Fruit that exceeds what the chosen person's own capacity and effort could account for. Fruit that carries the specific weight of something that originated in the genuine encounter with God, rather than in the chosen person's own strategies and initiatives. James 5:16 carries the most direct declaration of the power that the genuinely alive early morning sacred watch produces. The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. Effectual, fervent, the prayer that works, the prayer that is energized, not the prayer that is merely offered, the prayer that avails much. And the effectual, fervent prayer of the chosen person who has recovered the genuine prayer of the early morning sacred watch is the prayer that the declaration of James 5:16 was always describing, not the mechanical repetition of the recitation habit. The genuine and fervent and spirit-led prayer of a person who has brought their whole heart to the pre-dawn encounter and who has received from that encounter the specific and powerful prayer that the Spirit generates in the interior of the genuinely surrendered chosen person. That prayer avails much. In the specific situations it addresses, in the specific people it covers, in the specific territories of the calling it advances, and in the specific and cumulative transformation of the chosen life that it produces over the mornings and the seasons of the faithful and genuinely alive early morning sacred watch. The tradition that the hook of this message warned against will not kill the intimacy of the chosen person who has recovered the genuine prayer of the early morning sacred watch. Because the intimacy that has been recovered through the genuine pre-dawn encounter is no longer dependent on the tradition for its sustenance. The tradition can be received and used and honored for what it genuinely constitutes without being allowed to replace the genuine encounter that it was always meant to serve. The Lord's Prayer can be prayed as a genuine and living conversation with the Father, rather than a recitation of its words. The Psalms can be inhabited as the genuine prayer vocabulary of the genuine interior, rather than read as a devotional text. The familiar scriptures can be declared with the full weight of genuine faith, rather than the habitual production of a familiar sound. Everything that the tradition has preserved can be received in its genuine form when the genuine heart is present in the receiving. And the genuine heart is what the early morning sacred watch produces in the chosen person who brings it there consistently. One morning at a time, one genuine prayer at a time, one return from the recitation to the real at a time, until the pre-dawn becomes what it was always meant to be, the most alive and the most transformative and the most genuinely encountered hour of the chosen life. This prayer is itself the model of everything this message has been teaching. It does not begin with a formula. It does not move through a pre-established sequence of petition categories. It begins with what is actually in the interior of the chosen person who has just received this message, which is the specific and honest recognition that the early morning sacred watch has not always been what it was designed to be. And that recognition, brought honestly before God without the theological varnish that would make it look more spiritually resolved than it actually is the genuine beginning of the genuine prayer that the pre-dawn encounter has always been waiting for. Open your mouth and begin. Father, I come to you with the specific and honest acknowledgement that I have not always brought my actual self to the early morning sacred watch. I have brought a version of myself, the version that knew the right words and the right sequence and the right theological content, and I have offered that version to you consistently and called it devotion. And you have known in every one of those mornings the distance between the version I brought and the person behind it. You have known, and you have kept waking me anyway. You have kept calling me into the pre-dawn anyway. You have kept waiting in the darkness anyway for the moment when the script would finally be set aside and the actual person would show up. I am showing up now, not perfectly, not with the fully recovered, genuine prayer of a person who has already made the complete transition from recitation to the real, with the honest and specific and actual interior of a chosen person who has just seen what they have been doing and who wants something different for the mornings that are coming. I repent of the recitation, not with condemnation, because Romans 8:1 declares there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. With the genuine sorrow of a person who understands now what the mechanical performance of the familiar script was costing both of us, what it was costing me in terms of the encounter I was missing, and what it was costing you in terms of the actual person you were waking in the darkness, and who was giving you the formula rather than themselves. I am sorry for the formula, and I receive the grace that the repentance releases, the specific and sufficient grace to approach the next pre-dawn waking with the honesty and the genuine interior availability that the early morning sacred watch requires. Lord, lead the prayers I have not yet prayed. Every pre-dawn that is coming, every moment of the early morning sacred watch that has not yet arrived, I release the internal agenda for it now. I release the pre-established content. I release the familiar sequence, and I surrender the interior of each coming pre-dawn to the Spirit's leadership, trusting that the Spirit who makes intercession with groanings that cannot be uttered knows what needs to be prayed in each specific morning of my specific life, in this specific season of the specific calling I am carrying. Lead me into the territory I did not plan to visit. Take the prayer somewhere I did not expect it to go, and produce in me through the genuine surrender of the genuine pre-dawn the specific and effectual and fervent prayer that James 5:16 declares avails much, not the much of the impressive religious performance, the much of the genuine encounter, the much of the Spirit-led prayer of the whole heart that the Father seeks, and that the early morning sacred watch was always designed to produce. I come to the pre-dawn tomorrow as the actual person, with whatever is actually in my interior when the eyes open in the darkness, with the fear if the fear is there, with the grief if the grief is there, with the confusion and the longing and the specific and particular condition of the actual life I am actually living. All of it before you, poured out in the genuine prayer of the genuine heart of the genuinely chosen person who has finally understood what the early morning sacred watch is for. In the name of Jesus Christ, who rose a great while before day and who is the same yesterday and today and forever. Amen. You have been waking at 3 a.m. and now you know what to bring to it, not the script, not the formula, not the familiar sequence of petition and declaration that has been filling the pre-dawn with the sound of religious language, while the actual person behind the language was somewhere else entirely. Bring yourself, the actual you, the one who woke up in the darkness with whatever is actually in the interior right now. The fear and the grief and the confusion and the longing and the specific and particular condition of the specific and particular life you are actually living in this specific and particular season. That person. Before that God, in that darkness is the prayer, everything else is recitation. The tradition did not have to kill the intimacy, and it will not kill it anymore, because you have seen the difference between the two with enough clarity that returning to the script without knowing what you are doing is no longer available to you. The recognition is the recovery, not instantly, not without the consistent daily practice of choosing the genuine over the familiar and returning to the genuine when the familiar reasserts itself, and releasing the internal agenda to the Spirit's leadership every morning before the first word is spoken. But the direction of the recovery is set, and the direction is toward the encounter that the pre-dawn was always designed to produce. Tomorrow morning, when the eyes open in the darkness, before the phone, before the formula, before anything else has established its claim on the interior of that specific morning, say one genuine thing to God, whatever is actually there, and then wait, just wait, because the God who woke you in the darkness is already in the room, and He has been waiting a long time for the actual you to show up. If this message exposed something in your prayer life that needed to be seen, share this video with someone whose early morning sacred watch deserves to come alive. If you have not yet joined this family of faith, do so now by subscribing to our channel and turning on notifications. Leave a comment below that says, "I am done reciting." We pray over every name. You are seen, you are called, and the God who woke you in the darkness is waiting for the real you.